Hey everybody, welcome back to Premiere OnScript. In the last movie, at the very end of it, I talked about how I wanted to go kind of back into panels this week and talk about passing information and variables from an HTML panel into ExtendScript. Well, I got a comment on YouTube from somebody who'd like to hear about exporting out of Adobe Media Encoder, and that just sounded like a whole lot more fun. So we're going to cover that this week, and we'll get to passing information over next week. So here's what we're going to be making today. You can see that I have a project here. It has my last couple of blog movies that I've edited. I'm going to drag them into this bin called Ready for Export. And we're going to batch export those out of Adobe Media Encoder with a predefined preset. So here's the script, and we'll run that. It's going to ask us for a output directory. I have this example exports folder on my desktop, and it's going to run the script, and it's not going to look like anything happened. And here it doesn't look like anything happened, but then somehow, by the magic of scripting in Adobe Media Encoder, the exports have already started. And I set these to a really low quality WAV file so that they'd export quickly, and you could see that after each one is finished exporting, they are being removed from the queue. And then we'll fast forward this so you don't have to watch that. But that is the idea for today. If we go back into ExtendScript, here we go. We'll get started on going through this line by line. Now, this is a big difference from last week. Last week, I talked about creating sequences and creating a sequence from a preset. And that covered 2 lines of code. In this one, we're going to go all the way, not quite to 100, to 87 lines. But it really is a lot easier than it looks. And a lot of it, we're really just copy and pasting over from the sample code on Adobe's GitHub page and removing some of the stuff that we don't necessarily need. I've simplified it down a little bit, but that's what we're going to be working with today. So let's go through this line by line. The first line that you're familiar with if you watched the last movie is app.enableQE. This is just going to open up the quality engineering API that Adobe doesn't support, but they test around with, and let you access some of those features. The next line that I have here is app.encoder.launchEncoder. Now I have this commented out because I already have Media Encoder open, so I don't want to launch it. The things that are going to take this script the longest to do are 1, just exporting your files. It takes the time to export. And 2, launching Media Encoder. So I don't like to really launch Media Encoder from the script. I'd rather just open it up beforehand so that it can run through and add everything to the queue immediately rather than wait for Media Encoder to launch. And these next 3 things, these next 3 lines are the variables that we need in order to make this script work. What we need is a target bin inside of the Premiere project. We have named this target bin Ready for Export, which you can see matches that export bin I dropped these sequences into. Then we need an output preset path. This is going to be a preset path to a .epr file, which is Adobe's Media Encoder preset file. If you don't know what an EPR is yet, I'll leave a link in the blog post and a little description. But basically, this is just how Adobe stores their Media Encoder presets. And if you want to make one of these, it's really simple. We'll make one right now. We'll go into Premiere, and we'll just grab one of these movies, and we'll go to Export Media. And then I'm going to make this a really low quality waveform audio file. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to set it to 8,000 hertz, mono, 8-bit. Just try and make it so that it can export really fast for the needs of this example. And then I'm going to go to this button right here, right next to the preset area, which is going to allow me to save the name of this preset. So I'll call this blog example, and we'll save that, and then cancel out. Now, just like we talked about sequence presets in the previous movie to this one, we can go and grab that EPR file just by going to Documents, Adobe, this time going into Adobe Media Encoder, 12 presets, and here are the EPRs that I have created. You can see blog example right there. I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put it in my blog documents folder. And then I'm just going to copy that name and pull it over here and paste it in. So now we are routing directly to the output preset path of that EPR file. Once again, I want to reiterate that this is going to be an easy path to input if you're on a Mac. You have to remember to make it 2 backslashes if you're on a Windows computer. Again, I'll have you reference Adobe's GitHub sample code where they talk about getting the separators. And we're also going to include this function in our code a little bit later, but we'll get to that later. The third thing that you need to make this script run is an output path, which is really easy for us to grab. We'll just set a variable to output path and then go folder.select dialog. And in here, we'll give the user some directions of what they're trying to do. And that's going to pop up that file browser and let you choose a folder that these are all going to get saved into. Okay, so now we have our 3 variables declared that we need to make this work. We have our sequences dropped into the export bin in Premiere. The next step is going to be to find that bin and find the index of that within the children levels of Adobe's app.project.root item. So we also covered this in movie number 6, if you want to reference that. A function that I use that's just going to loop through every bin in the project until it finds the bin with the name you're searching for. So go watch that if you haven't watched that movie yet. If you have, we're just going to run that. We're going to declare the global vine variable, run the find bin index function, which you can see down here in the function list is right there. Just so you know, this is the script that we're writing. The rest are all just functions that we're going to be calling in this little script area here. So yeah, we're going to start at app.project.root item, and we're going to look for the bin that has the name of ready for export. Then, once it runs that function and has binded that index path to the global vine variable, we're going to make that the target bin variable, because I don't like to store anything for too long with global bind in case I want to use this again. We won't in this example, but I just used it as good practice to always transfer this over to a new variable. All right, let's move on to the next little bit of this script. What I do first is declare a variable called numSeeks, and this is just going to be the target bin.children.num items. It's going to define the number of loops that we want to do in our for loop as we loop down through that ready for export bin. We want it to loop through every sequence in that bin, but no more than that number of sequences. So here is where we begin calling that for loop. We're going to say variable a equals 0, and as long as a is less than the number of sequences in that bin, because this is going to give us a number of sequences and we're starting the for loop at 0, it's going to loop through every single one of those, and then at every single one of those, it's going to make a variable called export name and attach the sequence's name to the export name variable. Now we're going to go back and do another for loop, which you might be wondering, like, okay, we got it looping through the sequences. Why don't we just send those sequences off to Adobe Media Encoder now? Well, that's because in order to send it over to Media Encoder, we can only send sequences. And right now we're accessing these sequences through the project panel, through app.project.root item, children whatever. So these are like child 3 down under the root item in the file index, and it's not going to let us send those over to Media Encoder. Instead, what we have to do is send over the actual sequence object, which you can see. I'm going to open up Property Explorer here, and you can see that app.project.sequences is its own object. And you can loop through every sequence in the entire project as an array by this. So what we're doing in the script is we are storing that sequence name, looping through every single sequence in the project, and checking to see if the current sequence in the loop's name matches our export sequence's name. It's a workaround, and I haven't found a way to get this work in a more direct way. Maybe it will come up at some point, but for now I know that this works, and so I'm using it. It's working for me. Another weird quirk about sending stuff over to Media Encoder is that in order to do so, we're going to have to send it over as the active sequence, which means not only are we going through and looping through this and then matching it for a name, at that point we are then going to set it to the active sequence. So we're going to loop through all the sequences in the project. If the sequence's name matches our export name, we are going to set app.project.activeSequence and make it equal. Make sure that's one equal sign, not two. Make that equal to app.project.sequences with our loop variable number. So now at this point in the first loop, what we have done is we've gone into the project, we've gone into the ready for export bin, and we've begun looping down. The first sequence we come across is blog4. And so then we're going to take the name blog4, loop through all of the sequences of our project until we find the sequence called blog4, and we're going to pull blog4 up as the active sequence. Now, the next step is going to be to run this function render active sequence. And this is where we get pretty deep. And I'm going to go over this quickly. The code that I'm going to show you here is a dumbed down version of what's in the sample code. I didn't include everything because, to be totally honest, because of the kind of lack of documentation in that sample code, I don't really know what everything does. I know that this works for me and I haven't had any bugs come from it, so I'm just going to keep rolling with that. If you guys run this and do find some bugs, please comment on the video or on the blog. But let's keep moving. It's going to go down and it's going to take that first active sequence. And in this function, it's going to make a variable, call it active sequence, and then call that QE code that we enabled at the very top up here. It's going to go QE.project.getActiveSequence and bind that to the active sequence variable. Then if that exists, it's going to come in here and it's going to grab variables for the sequence in-point and the sequence out-point. Finally, it's going to ask for the project path and declare that new file app.project.path. And actually, we're going to delete this because that's one of those things that is in the sample code that I forgot to remove that I really don't think we need in this simple of a script. So disregard that. Next, it's going to ask us if output path exists. And I don't see output path anywhere in here. Oh, wait, that's because we already made it up here. We already made the user choose what directory they wanted at the very beginning. So now output path exists. The code has that. And we're going to create a variable called outPreset, make a new file, and give it the output preset path, which also we declared up here. So now we have an output path, we have the output preset, and we have that stored as a file. And if the out preset exists, and if that's equal to true, we're going to make a variable, call it output format extension. And in here, we're going to look into the active sequence and call a method called getExportFileExtension. And then within that, we are going to pass it the out preset.fs name. And what this is going to return to us is wave. If we were to put an alert down here and have it alert us the output format extension that it's going to return, it's just looking into that active sequence and that preset that we're sending it, and it's going to send us back what that file extension is going to be, whether it's .mov, .mp4, .wave. And then it's going to test if output format extension. It's going to come down here to output file name. And actually, this is another piece of that code that, I just copied and pasted this code over from the GitHub page. So we're actually not going to use that. What we're going to do now is form the full path to the file. So the path that Media Encoder has to write this file to. So what it's going to be first is the output path.fs name. Then it's going to grab the separator of the machine that it's on, whether that's Macintosh or Windows. And you can see that I've included this function getSep right here, which you can pull over from the GitHub page as well. It asks if the computer is Mac, return this separator. If it's not, return the Windows separator. So in this case, I'm on a Windows. It's going to return that double backslash. Then once it has that path and the double backslash, it's going to return the active sequence name, which, remember, we're still in that first loop, so the first one's going to be blog4, with a dot, and then that output format extension that we just grabbed right here. And then it's going to create a variable, call it outFileTest, and create a new file with the variable full path to file, which we just created right here. Now, this last piece of code is an error handling type of thing where if I'm going to export and then I'm sending it off and the file already exists, which you can see right here, it's testing for if outFileTest exists, then it's going to ask you, a file that name already exists, would you like to overwrite it? And if you confirm that you want to destroy the existing file, it will remove and then it will close that outFileTest that we called right here. Then once all this is done and we have all this gathered up, I'm going to come down here to the very end of all these conditionals and if statements. And just as the code on the GitHub page shows, I'm going to call app.encoder.encode sequence. I'm going to pass in app.project.activeSequence as the sequence to encode. I'm going to give it the full path to file, give it its full path that Adobe Media Encoder needs to spit this file out. I'm going to give it the outPreset.fs name, which is going to be this file up here that we declared with the output preset path, which is going to be the file that we have up here, the output preset path that we got up here, that we are giving it to export with that preset. And then we're going to do app.encoder. In all caps, encode underscore work area. And then we're going to give it a number. Now, all of this stuff you need to pass in there. And then this final thing is a pretty easy yes or no. 1 is going to remove the items from the queue when they're finished. 0 is going to leave them in once you finish. So I'm just going to change that to 0 to show you guys the difference. After that, I'm going to close out preset, which we opened up here. And boom, that's what was inside all of this. And it's going to go through and do that for every single sequence that you have in your target bin. Now, once all that's happened and it's sent all of that stuff over to Media Encoder, we have to do the last step of the process, which is calling app.encoder.startBatch, which is going to start the batch of anything that is in your Media Encoder queue. So now I'm going to go onto my desktop and just delete those files in here because I don't want to go through the error message of overwriting them 4 times. And we're going to run this one more time just to show you guys that it works again. I'm going to go into the desktop, example exports. It's going to pop this up. Looks like nothing happened in Premiere. And over here, it's begun exporting these to the path that we gave it with the preset that we created. And because we set that binary figure in this code right here to 0, Unlike at the beginning of this video when I showed you the example, now it is leaving these in the queue to show that they successfully exported. And we'll fast forward this and show you the completed files at the end. Here they are in the example exports folder on my desktop. And there you go. So I hope this wasn't too much to cover in one movie. If it was, please let me know and say that I need to slow it down a little bit. Or if you like going over longer scripts like this, it'd be great to hear a comment from you guys as well on what you enjoy. Again, a lot of this stuff is just looking through the sample code on Adobe's GitHub page. And I'll provide a link to this in the blog post. This is everything that they say needs to be in this function on the GitHub page. It goes all the way down here. I removed a whole bunch of this and have been getting it to work just fine and just as reliable, I think. But if you want to go through and check out what they recommend, by all means do it, and please let me know what results you come out with. For now, this is what I'm sticking with because it's a whole lot easier. So again, thank you for watching, and please let me know if this video was too long or if you like these longer, more project-based tutorial videos. In the next movie, I am going to talk about passing information from our HTML panel over into ExtendScript. That way we can begin building more robust panels. And I promise I'll do it this time. I won't just go on to do something cooler. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.